"Sign it," my son said, sliding the papers across the table. "Or I'll make sure you never see your grandchildren again." I looked at him, this man I had raised, fed, sacrificed 23 years of my life for, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet. Not broken, not afraid. Quiet in the way that a storm goes quiet right before it tears the roof clean off. I picked up the pen, and I smiled. "My name is Gerald Whitmore. I am 64 years old. I built a construction and property development business from absolutely nothing, from a second-hand ute, a toolbox, and a reputation for showing up on time. By the time I turned 58, Whitmore Developments was worth just over $400 million. We had projects running from Brisbane down to Melbourne, a commercial precinct in Adelaide, and 2 residential estates outside Perth that I was particularly proud of. I had a modest house in the Barossa Valley that I loved more than any of the city apartments. I had my health. I had my 2 kelpies, Biscuit and Drum. I had my son, Marcus. I thought that was enough. I thought I had done everything right. People will tell you that wealth changes people. I used to nod along to that and think I understood what they meant. I didn't. Not really. Not until I watched it happen to someone I had held in my arms when he was 4 hours old and crying at the ceiling. Marcus was 31 when his mother passed away. My wife, Helen, had been quietly ill for nearly 2 years before we lost her. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed late, gone fast. She was 57. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, kept a handwritten address book even when everyone else had moved to phones, and made the best lamb roast I have ever eaten in my life. When she died, something went out of Marcus that I assumed was grief and assumed would come back. It didn't come back. Something else came in its place. He started coming around more, which I appreciated at first. He would sit with me at the kitchen table and ask about the business, the contracts, the land parcels, the development pipeline. I thought he was finally taking an interest. He had never been particularly drawn to the work. He had studied commerce, dabbled in a few ventures of his own that hadn't gone anywhere, and largely lived comfortably on the allowance I had provided since he turned 18. I had never pushed him. Helen always said to give him time. I gave him time. The questions started getting more specific. He wanted to know about the estate planning, who held the power of attorney, whether my will had been reviewed recently. I told him I had a solicitor handling all of that, a man named Douglas Parrish, who had worked with me for over 15 years. Marcus said that was good. He said he had someone he wanted me to meet. The someone was a man called Neville Frost. He was introduced to me as a specialist in succession, planning for high net worth individuals. He was polished in that particular way that makes you distrust a person on instinct and then feel foolish for distrusting them. He wore expensive watches and spoke with a careful confidence that sounded like expertise. He had a firm in the city, an office with a view, a leather chair that cost more than my first car. He suggested I consider restructuring my holdings for tax efficiency purposes. He had a very detailed proposal ready the first time we met, which I should have found strange, but didn't. I told him I would think about it. Marcus pushed. Not aggressively, never aggressively. Not then. He would mention it over dinner. Drop it into conversations about other things. Come back to it gently the way water comes back to a crack in concrete. He said Neville had helped other families in similar positions. He said it was just smart planning. He said Mum would have wanted me to be protected. That one landed. I said I would have a preliminary meeting with Neville and Douglas together. Marcus said that was very sensible. He looked pleased in a way that I noticed, but could not name at the time. The meeting between Neville and Douglas did not go well. Douglas called me the following morning before I had finished my first coffee. He said something wasn't right with Frost's firm. He said the proposed restructure would effectively transfer operational control of my primary holding company into a new trust, and that the trust, when he read the fine print closely, gave the trustee almost unchecked discretionary power over distributions. He asked who the proposed trustee was. I didn't know. Douglas found out. The proposed trustee was a company registered in Queensland 6 months earlier. The sole director of that company was Neville Frost. The company had no trading history, no assets, and had been registered at an address that turned out to be a serviced office suite rented by the fortnight. I sat with that information for 3 days before I told Marcus what I had found. He went very still when I told him. Not guilty, still. More like a person calculating something behind their eyes. Then he said Douglas was being overly cautious. He said this kind of structure was completely standard. He said Neville had explained all of this, and I had clearly misunderstood. His voice stayed calm and flat and certain, and I sat across from my son and understood for the first time that I did not actually know who he was. I told him I would not be proceeding with the restructure. 3 weeks later, I had a fall. It happened in the workshop at the back of my property. I'd been moving some old timber, and I slipped on a wet concrete floor. I fractured my wrist and hit the back of my head against the workbench hard enough to put me in hospital for 2 nights. It was an accident. I have no doubt it was an accident. I want to say that clearly because what came next made me question it for a long time, and I had to work deliberately to hold on to the truth of what I knew versus what I feared. What came next was this. Marcus arrived at the hospital with Neville Frost and a woman I had never met, who was introduced as a neurological health advocate. This is not a real profession, I would later find out. It is a title people invent. She had a clipboard and a sympathetic expression, and she spoke about the fall in a way that suggested it was part of a pattern of deteriorating judgment and capacity. Marcus told the attending doctor that I had been showing signs of confusion for months, that I had forgotten appointments, that I had made financial decisions that concerned the family. There is no family. There is only Marcus. But the doctor did not know that. They requested a cognitive assessment. I was in hospital with a fractured wrist and a mild concussion, and they requested a cognitive assessment. And because I was frightened and foggy and did not fully understand what was happening, I agreed to it. The assessment took 3 hours. I answered questions about dates, about sequences, about memory and reasoning. I was not at my best. I had hit my head, and I had not slept properly, and I was worried and confused. The results were described to me as showing some areas of concern. Marcus nodded along like a man who had expected exactly this. There is a process in this country, in every state, by which a person can be legally declared incapable of managing their own affairs. It does not require them to be incapacitated. It requires paperwork and a willing assessor and someone who stands to benefit from the outcome. I did not know this process existed until I was partway through it. The application to the tribunal was filed under Marcus's name. My son applied to have me declared incompetent. The application cited the cognitive assessment, a statement from Neville Frost about my recent financial behavior, and a declaration from Marcus himself, who described himself as a concerned family member acting in my best interests. I found out about the application from Douglas, who received a copy as my legal representative. He called me immediately. He drove to my property that afternoon. He sat at my kitchen table with the documents in his hands, and he looked at me with an expression I will not forget, part anger, part something close to grief, and he said, "They are trying to take everything from you." I did not cry. I want to tell you that I cried, because that would be the normal human response to learning that your child has moved to have you legally stripped of your rights and your life's work. But I didn't. I went very calm. I went back to that quiet place. I asked Douglas what we needed to do. The next 6 weeks were the most careful 6 weeks of my life. The first thing we did was contact a neuropsychologist named Dr. Patricia Sung, a leading specialist in cognitive assessment with nearly 30 years of practice, operating completely independently of any involvement with Marcus or Frost. I underwent a full evaluation. It took 2 days. Dr. Sung's report was detailed, thorough, and unambiguous. I was cognitively intact. My memory, reasoning, and executive function were all well within normal range for a man of my age. The earlier assessment, the one done at the hospital, had been conducted under conditions that Dr. Sung described, professionally and carefully, as not meeting the standards required for a valid determination of capacity. The second thing we did was engage a forensic accountant. Her name was Robin Chalmers, and she had spent 12 years working fraud investigations before going into private practice. I gave her access to everything, every account, every transaction, every corporate structure. What she found over the following weeks made Douglas go quiet in a different way than before. Marcus had not acted alone, and he had not acted recently. The trail went back nearly 18 months to just before Helen died. There were small transfers, initially. Money moving from subsidiary accounts into accounts I didn't recognize. Contracts signed on behalf of one of my companies, signed with a version of my signature that was not quite right, directing work to a construction firm that, upon investigation, was beneficially owned by a company connected to Neville Frost. The amounts were not enormous at first. They became enormous. By the time Robin finished her analysis, approximately $11 million had been moved out of my business interests through a series of layered transactions. $11 million. Over 18 months. While I was grieving my wife, I had a third conversation with Douglas after Robin presented her findings. We sat in his office, just the two of us, no one else, and we talked through what needed to happen. There would be a response to the tribunal application. There would be a separate referral to the Australian Federal Police regarding the fraudulent transactions. There would be civil recovery proceedings. But before any of that, there was something I needed to do myself. I needed to let Marcus believe it was working. This was Douglas's idea, and I want to give him credit for it because I would not have thought of it on my own. He said, "Right now, they think you're isolated and frightened, and they have the momentum. If we reveal what we know too early, they move assets. They disappear. They minimize. Let them think you're compliant. Let them come to you." So I called Marcus. I told him that I had been thinking about what he said, that the fall had shaken me more than I wanted to admit, that perhaps he was right, that I needed proper support going forward. I said I was ready to talk to Neville again about the restructure. I heard relief in his voice. Genuine relief. That was, I think, the hardest moment of all, hearing how relieved he was and knowing what it meant about how he had thought of me. We arranged a meeting at my property. Marcus, Neville Frost, and 2 solicitors from Frost's firm. They would bring the new documents for the trust restructure. We would go through them together. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. At 1:50, Douglas arrived. At 1:55, Robin arrived. At 1:58, 2 officers from the AFP arrived. I put the kettle on. When Marcus walked through my front door at 2 o'clock and saw who was sitting at my kitchen table, he stopped moving. He stopped completely. Neville Frost walked in behind him and did the same. One of the solicitors looked at his colleague. The other one looked at the door as if he were calculating whether the distance was worth it. Nobody sat down. I looked at my son across the kitchen of the house where he had grown up, where his mother had made the lamb roast he always asked for on his birthday, where his childhood drawings had been stuck to the fridge until they curled at the edges and fell off. I looked at him and I said, "I have been waiting for you." I want to describe what happened on his face when he understood. It was not a clean emotion. It was several things moving through at once: fear, calculation, and underneath both of those, something that looked almost like shame. I choose to believe the shame was real. I cannot prove it. and it does not change what came next. But I choose to believe it. The AFP officers were professional and efficient. The documents Frost had brought, the trust restructure papers, were taken as evidence. The forensic financial analysis was provided. Both Marcus and Frost were formally interviewed that afternoon. Frost's two solicitors declined to speak without independent legal representation, which was their right, and, given everything, probably their wisest decision of the day. The tribunal application was withdrawn. Dr. Sung's assessment was filed with the relevant authority, along with a formal complaint about the conduct and credentials of the assessor who had produced the hospital report. That assessor, it turned out, had no formal neuropsychological qualifications whatsoever. She was a life coach who had rebranded herself for this specific purpose. The fraud proceedings took 14 months. Neville Frost was convicted on 6 counts of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. He was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months, non-parole period of 2 years and 10 months. His assets, including the serviced office suite I mentioned earlier, which it turned out he actually owned, were subject to proceeds of crime orders. The $11 million was not fully recovered, but approximately $7.3 million was returned to my business accounts. Marcus pleaded guilty to 2 counts of obtaining financial advantage by deception and 1 count of attempting to pervert the course of justice, the tribunal application. He was sentenced to 3 years with a non-parole period of 18 months. He served the full non-parole period and was released on parole conditions. He has not contacted me since his release. I do not expect that he will. I am not going to tell you that this destroyed me. It would be dishonest. I am going to tell you that there are mornings, particularly quiet mornings in the Barasa, when the light comes in flat and gold across the valley, and Biscuit is asleep under the kitchen table, when I sit with my coffee and feel the weight of all of it settle across my shoulders like something I have learned to carry. Not comfortably. I don't think you carry something like this comfortably. But you carry it. My business is intact. Douglas Parrish still works with me, and I will not embarrass him by describing what his loyalty has meant to me, because he is a private man, and he would not like it. Robin Chalmers sent me a small plant as a gift when the civil recovery was finalized. It is a succulent. It is currently on my kitchen windowsill, and it appears to be thriving, which I appreciate as a metaphor even if it was not intended as one. I have 3 grandchildren, Marcus's children from his marriage, which ended during the proceedings. His former wife, to her considerable credit, has maintained contact with me. The grandchildren know that their father and I are estranged. They do not know the details, and they will not hear them from me. They come to the Barossa for school holidays sometimes. We muster the dogs and go walking in the hills, and I make things on the barbecue, and they ask questions about the property, and I answer them honestly. There is a version of the future in which this is enough. I am working toward that version. There are things I know now that I wish I had known at 30 or 40 or even 55. I will share them with you not as lessons. I am a builder, not a teacher, but as observations from a man who has seen the particular thing I have seen. When someone you love starts asking questions that are really about money, the love in the conversation does not make the questions less dangerous. It makes them more dangerous because it disarms you. It makes you feel that skepticism is a betrayal of the relationship. It is not. Protecting yourself is not the same as failing to trust. Healthy trust is built on honesty, and when the honesty is missing, what you are protecting is not really a relationship. It is an arrangement that someone else is managing on their own terms. Get your affairs properly documented. Not because you distrust your family, because documentation is what protects everyone when intentions are unclear and circumstances change. A will that has been independently reviewed, a power of attorney that has been properly assigned, legal structures that your own solicitor understands and has signed off on, these are not signs of a suspicious mind. They are signs of a responsible one. If someone ever tries to convince you that your memory or your judgment is failing, and you have no reason to believe it is, take that very seriously. Not because it might be true, but because it might be deliberate. Capacity challenges are a real and growing mechanism through which vulnerable people are exploited. You have the right to an independent assessment. You have the right to your own legal representation. You have the right to a second opinion and a third one. Do not let urgency or sympathy or family pressure take those rights away from you. The people who will stand with you when everything is at stake are rarely the people you expect. Douglas Parrish is a quiet man who drives a 12-year-old Camry and keeps a bowl of wrapped mints on his reception desk. He is the person who drove to my house the afternoon the documents arrived and sat at my kitchen table and said, "They are trying to take everything from you." He is the person who helped me take it back. Pay attention to the people in your life who show up when it costs them something. They are telling you something true about who they are. Finally, betrayal by someone you love does not have to define the rest of your life. This is not a simple thing to say, and I do not mean it simply. I mean it as a practical matter. You can grieve the relationship. You can hold the person accountable. You can feel the anger and the loss and the particular bitterness of realizing the timeline of looking back and mapping the months and understanding when things shifted and why. You can do all of that. And then, slowly, at your own pace, in your own time, you can choose to build something that belongs to you entirely. Something they did not touch and cannot take. That is what I am doing now. Biscuit just came in from outside and is sitting on my foot, which is his way of asking for dinner. Drum is still on the veranda, watching the last of the light go off the valley. The succulent on the windowsill is doing well. I am 64 years old. I built everything I have from a ute and a toolbox and a reputation for showing up. They did not break that. They tried, and they did not break it. And I was sitting right there when they came home.